Ji ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji ki Fateh. As Bhai Sahib said, we are kicking off how we commemorate Safar-e-Shahadat today. I will be covering some background on Shaheedi Week, the history of Anandpur Sahib, and the events leading up to Guru Gobind Singh Ji and the Khalsa Army vacating the fort there on the 6th of Po in English to pair with what you heard from Bhai Sahib Ji in Punjabi earlier. Shaheedi Week being formalized this way is relatively new, but Sikhs have been remembering the Shaheeds for over 300 years. The events of December 1705 have left a permanent impression on the month. This week, we remember Guru Gobind Singh Ji and his own commitment to Sikhi even after losing his entire family, the 4 Sahibzade Guru Sahib's sons who attained Shaheedi at such young ages, and their grandmother Mata Gujari Ji, who is known for instilling such strength in them, and the Shaheeds in the Khalsa Fauj who fought until their last breath. We remember them and we want to teach our Sangat, especially our youth, about them, to honor what they did for Sikhi and for us. The point of this is not to cause guilt, but to inspire us all to take a lesson from these Shaheeds and to stand up for what is right in whatever way we can in our own lives. If anything you hear this week resonates with you, I encourage you to research it further instead of leaving it here in this Diwan hall. First, it's important to define a Shaheed. In terms of language, the word Shaheed in Punjabi derives from the Arabic term Shahid. When we talk about Shaheedi in Sikhi, it's a concept that shows up throughout our history, with some of our own gurus becoming Shaheed. In Sikhi, a Shaheed is someone who sacrifices their life for Sikhi, such as the many examples we will learn about together this week. Additionally, a Shaheed can also be someone who gives up their life for Sikh principles, such as the upholding of human rights, in line with Sikhi's teachings of the oneness of humanity. An example of that is Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji, who gave Shaheedi after the Kashmiri Pandits came to him for help, despite not being a Hindu himself. That resulted in the title of Shrisht Ki Chadar, or protector of the world, because his protection was for everyone, not just for Sikhs who pledged to follow him. From Gurbani, Pehla maran kabool kar, jeevan ki shad aas, ho sabna ki rein ka, to aao hamare paas. First, accept death and abandon any hope of life. Become the dust under everyone's feet, and only then you can come to me. This slok by Guru Arjan Dev Ji shows us the depth of Shaheedi. You have to surrender yourself and be okay with death. It is the ultimate sacrifice. This is a core concept of our faith and one that we cannot respect highly enough. Second, let's take a moment to understand how this week is commemorated by Sikhs, especially on the very land where these events took place. In Punjab, during this time of year, the Sangat gathers to remember Chamkaur Di Jang and Saka Sarhand. You may also hear these gatherings called Sabha or Shaheedi Jod Mela. These events include Kirtan, Katha, Langar, and often a Tati Jatha to help the Sangat learn and to continue the Sikh oral history tradition. Some families choose to sleep on the floor during this time from a feeling of humility and to recall the discomfort those like the younger Sahibzade and Mata Gujari Ji endured in the Thanda Burj, or like how Guru Gobind Singh Ji slept on the ground in the Machiwara jungle. Other Sangat chooses to walk to Fatehgarh Sahib and the Sarhand area in remembrance. I'm sharing these examples so that you can have a sense of how this time is commemorated. The takeaway that I want you to have is that the events of this week about 320 years ago have touched the hearts of Sikhs deeply, and they continue to resonate with us today. Now that we understand the context of Shaheedi Week, let's orient ourselves briefly to the history of Anandpur Sahib, which is where the events of this week began. The land, now known as Anandpur Sahib, was originally founded by Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji in 1665, with the foundation laid by Bhai Gurditta Ji. Guru Sahib bought this land from the then ruler of Bilaspur and named this place Jak Nanki, with Jak meaning village or pind, and Nanki being Guru Sahib's mother's name. Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji was the son of Guru Har Gobind Sahib and Mata Nanki Ji. Gurdwara Guru Ka Mahal stands at the site of the first building there. Our 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, grew the area and then renamed it, founding Anandpur Sahib in March of 1689. The land of Anandpur Sahib has seen many key events throughout Sikh history. This is where Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib was living when the Kashmiri Pandits came to him for help, like I was talking about earlier. This is the land where the Khalsa was formalized during the Vaisakhi of 1699. And Anandpur Sahib also was the site of multiple events in Sikh military history. That city has 5 forts which Guru Sahib had built and fortified to defend the city and the civilians living there. One of these battles that involved the fort at Anandpur Sahib is the Sakhi of Bhai Bachittar Singh going up against the war elephant a few years before the events we will cover today. I share this to emphasize the fact that this place and these people were not new to battle and were not new to war. They made a lifelong commitment to Sikhi and its principles and were prepared to uphold those principles until their very last breath. Beyond history, Anandpur Sahib is also tied to the concept of Begumpura. Anandpur means the city of bliss, and Begumpura means a city without sorrow. This is the concept of an ideal Sikh city where everyone lives free from oppression and is connected to the divine. This concept is referenced in Bhagat Ravidas Ji's Bani. Begumpura sahar ko nao, dukh ando nahi tai thao, na tasveez khiraj na mal, khauf na khata na tars jawab. This Shabad outlines the peaceful, equality-forward, and trouble-free nature of Vaheguru's kingdom. This is a utopian realm referred to in Gurbani, but is not an earthly place. However, the traits and the things present in Begumpura are what Guru Sahib had in mind when developing Anandpur Sahib and the society there. Now that we've covered this context, let's orient ourselves to the circumstances of December 1705. The calendar systems are different, and Po is one of the winter months when these events took place. In Sikh literature, this time can also be called Po Diyan Raatan, or the nights of the month of Po. This refers to the time period that this was taking place and helps us connect the calendar system we're familiar with today to the calendar system when this was happening. Guru Gobind Singh Ji, his family, and the Khalsa Army have been under siege in the Anandpur Sahib fort since May, so for over 7 months at this point. The forces besieging them are the armies of the Hill Kings or Pahadi Raje and the Mughals. It's important to understand that this wasn't a typical war over land, subjects, wealth, or any type of personal gain for himself and his family. Guru Sahib didn't need to fight for any of that. This was a fight of righteousness over oppression, such as forced religious conversion and ill treatment of those who are vulnerable in society. The growth of Sikhi and Guru Sahib's teachings posed a threat to those rulers and their stronghold on power because Guru Sahib did not quietly accept the way that things were. They fought the oppression and they encouraged others to do so as well. At 7 months into the siege, things were dire inside the fort. Civilians around Anandpur Sahib had long been sent away for their own safety, but there were not enough rations and supplies for the army itself. The Sikhs had resorted to tree leaves for sustenance in the absence of food that would nourish them and keep them strong. The risk of starvation was real and very imminent. Things were at the point that even sending a small group to get water required strategizing. 2 Singhs would fight and 2 Singhs would carry the water back to the fort. We today can only imagine how hard it would be to stay in Jardikla in those conditions. These lines from Gurbani encapsulate the Sikh spirit. Je sukh de ta tujhe aradi, dukh bhi tujhe te ai, je pukh de ta itihi raja, dukh vich sukh manai. If you, Vaheguru, give me happiness, I will worship you. Even in pain, I will meditate on you. Even if you give me hunger, I will be satisfied. I am joyful even in the midst of sorrow. These are high principles and high words. I don't know that we today are capable of living up to them, but we have historical proof that the Sikhs of 320 years ago did this again and again. Outside the fort, the attacking armies were also facing challenges. They were dealing with deserters, the high expense of continuing a siege for months and months, and the reputation hit of outnumbering the Khalsa Fauj and still not being able to win. They were embarrassed. They wanted to lure Guru Sahib out of the fort, so first they swore on a cow figurine made of atta or flour that Guru Sahib and his Sikhs could leave the fort unharmed. This was meant to be a validation of their promise because the cow is sacred in Hinduism, which was the faith that a lot of them practiced. However, Guru Sahib saw through their schemes. He instructed his Sikhs to fill the wagons, which he had the Hill Kings themselves provide so as not to waste anything of the decreasing supplies available to the Khalsa army, with old and broken things that the Sikhs no longer needed, and they sent out a decoy caravan out of the fort. Then, when the Pahadi Raja's armies attacked, it proved that their solemn oaths about allowing the safe exit from the fort were all false. Guru Sahibs made their lies very clear and laid it out for the whole world to see. The next thing the attacking army did was produce the same promise of safe passage written on a Quran, or the Muslim holy text. By this point, the situation within the fort continued to worsen, so Guru Sahib consulted with the leaders of the Khalsa Army. I'd like to add a moment of personal reflection here. It's important to remember that Guru Sahib was a spiritual leader, but he was a military leader too. Yes, he was in charge and the Sikhs followed him loyally, but he still consulted with his Sikhs for strategic input. This is what leading by example looks like, and it ensured that the military strategy skills grew within the Khalsa Fauj too. Everything about the way Guru Sahib led was intentional and guided by Sikh principles. Once the decision to quit the fort was made, Guru Sahib and the Sikhs strategized on the best way to do so. Guru Gobind Singh Ji did one last round of the fort and the alleyways of Anandpur Sahib. Multiple of the sources that I read to prepare for tonight emphasize just how dark and eerie the atmosphere all around was. We know from history that Guru Sahib would never return to this place again. Guru Sahib went to Gurdwara Sikh Sahib, and if we remember, there are two Gurdwara by this name. The one that is at Anandpur is where Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji's head was cremated. He did parkarma there and he offered ardas. I'm going to add one more personal reflection here. We are taught that we should do ardas before undertaking anything new, but we all know that not everyone follows that and not all of the time. Here we have Guru Sahib himself taking the time to do ardas in the midst of such a stressful and a dangerous situation. This highlights that remembering Vaheguru in any and every situation is critical, even if we might be willing or wanting to make excuses otherwise. After conclusion of the ardas, he entrusted the seva of that place to Gurbaksh Ram Das Udasi. Then the Sikhs were organized into jathe or groups. Leading these groups were Mahan Sikhs like Bhai Dharam Singh, Bhai Mani Singh, Sahibzada Ajit Singh, Bhai Buddha Singh, Bhai Jeevan Singh, and Bhai Vichitar Singh. One jatha included women, elderly, and kids, and another was in charge of the war horses and other supplies. Multiple other jathe were comprised of Sikhs ready to fight at a moment's notice. The Sikhs emptied out of the fort and left under the cover of night. We can only imagine how they must have felt, defying starvation, a siege, seeing so many of their own obtain Shaheedi, now having to move forward without knowing what was coming next. But they remained in Chardikla and trusted Vaheguru. The Sikhs were heading towards Kiratpur. About 10 kilometers into that journey, they were attacked from behind. This was a complete about face from not one, but two sacred promises made on sacred objects of faith that promised a safe passage. Guru Sahib and the Sikhs knew it was a matter of when, not if, the armies attacked, so they had prepared strategically. Bhai Uday Singh Ji and a jatha of 50 Singhs engaged the enemy. They fought valiantly. Guru Sahib had given Bhai Uday Singh some of his clothing, so this jatha was both fighting the enemy and fooling them. The enemy was under the impression that they were closing in on Guru Sahib himself, and they celebrated when Bhai Uday Singh was killed. They thought that they had killed Guru Gobind Singh Ji himself. There is now a Gurdwara there to commemorate Bhai Uday Singh Ji's Shaheedi. By this point, the rest of the Sikhs had proceeded farther towards the Shahi Kadbi, and the Mughal and Pahadi Raja forces had figured out that they had been fooled and they had not actually successfully killed Guru Sahib. Dibbi refers to a dune or hill to give you an idea of the terrain. At this point, this was all empty land. Now this is a populated area of villages and cities, but back then this was all open land, but still complicated and not flat terrain, which meant that any kind of fighting there would be very difficult. We will pick up from there tomorrow and learn about the separation at the Sarsa Nadi and river. But before I end, I'd like to take a moment to thank Faisal and the Sevadaj that put this effort together. We hear about this week in Sikh history every single year, but being asked to speak in front of the Sangats today gave me the opportunity to research further, and I learned more historical detail than I ever knew before and more than I can cover and share with you all today. This has deepened my appreciation for these Sikh sacrifices, facing starvation and still remaining committed to Sikhi and Sikh principles, willingly donning the attire of Guru Sahib, knowing that the enemy will focus their violence on you, walking in the night in the cold under constant threat of attack and not even knowing the next time that you will feel safe. That's something that I can't even imagine. I ask every one of us listening now to reflect as well. We are not in a battle under siege now, but what are we doing to fight for Sikhi survival and Sikh principles in the world? What can we learn from this history and apply in our day-to-day lives? How can we face the challenges of today with a Dardi Kala mindset? We can learn from our Shaheeds and our history to try to be better tomorrow than we are today. I encourage us all to identify one commitment that we're willing to make, whether that be big or small, and to follow through that in the new year. Bholna chukan di himmat karni ji. Vaheguru ji ka khalsa, Vaheguru ji